Ketchum, Idaho, Saturday night, July 1, 1961. Ernest Hemingway cannot sleep. He walks downstairs to the gun cabinet in the foyer, opens it, stares at the rifles, closes it. Upstairs, his wife Mary sleeps, unaware that tomorrow morning she will become a widow. He is 61 years old, Nobel Prize winner, one of the greatest American writers who ever lived. But tonight, he cannot remember his own stories. The electroshock therapy, 36 sessions over 6 months, erased them. The doctors said they cured his paranoia by resetting his brain. What they actually did was destroy his memory. Except it wasn't paranoia. In 1983, 22 years after his death, the FBI will declassify his surveillance file. 124 pages, phone taps, mail interception, physical surveillance. Everything he told his doctors, his wife, his friends, all of it was true. They were watching him, recording him, following him to banks and grocery stores. But by the time the world learns this, Ernest Hemingway will have been dead for 2 decades. He opens the gun cabinet again. This time he removes the Boss & Co. 12-gauge shotgun, beautiful, engraved, his favorite. If there must be an ending, at least it will be written with style. But before that ending comes a life unlike any other. 4 wives, each loved and betrayed. 9 concussions that slowly destroyed his brain. 2 plane crashes in 2 days. A private spy network in wartime Cuba. Recruitment by Soviet intelligence. Surveillance by American intelligence. And a son who would become a daughter 40 years too late. This is the story of how America's greatest writer became a double agent who never understood he was an agent at all. And it begins 60 years earlier, in a house where a little boy stands in front of a mirror, wearing his mother's dress. Oak Park, Illinois, July 21, 1899. Dr. Clarence Edmonds Hemingway runs from the second-floor bedroom where his wife has just given birth. He stands on the front porch, raises his cornet to his lips, and plays a triumphant blast across the street to his own parents' house. A son, his first son. The gesture is pure theater, announcing victory to the neighborhood. Symbolic, that moment, the boy will spend his entire life announcing his triumphs to the world, whether anyone wants to hear them or not. But before the announcements comes the formation. And the formation happens in a house divided between 2 irreconcilable visions of what a man should be. 3 years later, Oak Park, summer of 1902. The photograph shows 2 little girls in identical white dresses, matching bonnets with ribbons, long curled hair, but one of the girls is Ernest, age 3. His sister Marceline stands beside him, dressed identically. Their mother, Grace Hall Hemingway, designed it this way. She was an opera singer once, talented enough to have auditioned for Carnegie Hall. But she married a doctor and settled into teaching music lessons in suburban Chicago. Her ambitions thwarted, she turned her children into an experiment. Marceline was born in January 1898, Ernest in July 1899. 18 months apart, but Grace decided they would be twins. She held Marceline back from school, dressed them identically, styled their hair the same. For the first 5 years of Ernest's life, he wore dresses, ribbons, and long curls. "Mama, why am I wearing a dress?" "Because you and Marceline are my angels, identical." "But Papa says boys wear trousers." "Papa doesn't understand art." Grace dominated the upper floors of the house. The music room with its grand piano, her students arriving every afternoon, scales and areas floating through the rooms. She earned more money than Clarence, which gnawed at his dignity. She was forceful, critical, ambitious. Ernest would later write to a friend, "My mother was a complete all-American bitch. She would have made a mule shoot itself, let alone poor father." When Ernest turned 5, the experiment ended abruptly. Grace cut his hair, put him in boys' clothes, sent him to school, but the damage was planted. He would spend the rest of his life proving his masculinity to himself, to his mother, to the world. The house itself was architecture as metaphor. Dr. Clarence maintained his medical office in a room between the first and second floors. Children were summoned there for discipline, the smell of carbolic acid and fear. A leather strap hung on the wall behind the examination table, and in the desk drawer, a revolver from the Civil War. Grandfather Anson had carried it. Now it belonged to Clarence. Young Ernest knew where it was kept. He knew where his father hid the ammunition. He would remember this 28 years later. Clarence taught his sons to hunt and fish at Walloon Lake in northern Michigan, where the family spent every summer. Look carefully, Ernest. Really see what's there. Don't add, don't imagine, just observe. Clinical precision married to wilderness. This training would become the foundation of his prose style. Short sentences, no unnecessary adjectives, the iceberg principle with 7/8 below the surface. But even at the lake, Grace followed. She built her own cottage and called it a studio. She composed music there and demanded the children perform for summer guests. Ernest learned to hate performance, to despise anything inauthentic. Yet he would spend decades performing the role of Ernest Hemingway, adventurer. The split in the house created a split in the boy. Father's masculinity versus mother's artistry, outdoor violence versus indoor culture, action versus contemplation. He would never reconcile them. Instead, he would careen between extremes for 61 years. Then came the war. 18 years old, summer of 1918. Too young for the regular army, Ernest volunteers as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross in Italy. He wants to see combat. He wants to prove himself. He wants to escape Oak Park and his mother's dominance. Italy gives him what he asked for and more. July 8, 1918. Salta di Paiva, near the Austrian front. Ernest is handing out chocolate and cigarettes to Italian soldiers in a forward trench when an Austrian mortar shell explodes. 237 pieces of metal enter his body, shrapnel in his legs, his torso, his face. The soldier next to him is killed instantly, torn apart. Ernest, somehow, remains conscious. What happens next becomes legend, though every detail is verified. He lifts a wounded Italian soldier, carries him toward the aid station. An Austrian machine gun opens fire, 2 more bullets punch through his knees. He staggers but doesn't drop the man. They give him an aluminum knee prosthesis, 2 Italian medals for valor. Oak Park newspapers print his photograph, local boy, war hero. He returns home limping, carrying shrapnel that will set off metal detectors for the rest of his life. But the real wound is invisible. Pain makes him feel real. Danger is the only honesty in a world of lies. He becomes addicted to adrenaline, seeking new wars, new risks, new confirmations that he is alive. The war also gives him a nurse. Agnes von Kurowski, Red Cross nurse at the Milan hospital, 7 years older than Ernest. She is kind to him during his recovery. He falls desperately in love, writes her letters about their future together. But when he returns to America to prepare their life, she writes to say she's marrying an Italian officer instead. The rejection shatters him. He will carry this wound, abandonment by a woman, into every marriage that follows. 2 years pass. Ernest works as a journalist in Chicago, writes short stories that no one publishes, drinks too much, fishes in Michigan, feels trapped. Then he meets Hadley Richardson. She is 28, 8 years older like Agnes, red-haired, quiet, with a small trust fund from her family. They meet through mutual friends in Chicago. She believes in his talent when he is just a damaged veteran with literary ambitions and no publications worth mentioning. They marry in September 1921 and sail for Europe. Paris becomes their home. Paris, early 1920s. They are poor but happy. A tiny apartment with no hot water, meals of bread, cheese, wine. Ernest writes in cafes because the flat is too cold. Hadley types his manuscripts on a portable typewriter. At night they read to each other. On weekends they take cheap train trips, skiing in Austria, hiking in Switzerland. Summer of 1923 they travel to Pamplona, Spain for the festival of San Fermin. The bullfights mesmerize Ernest. The ritual, the courage, the moment of truth when the matador faces the bull. He sees in the bullring everything he values: grace under pressure, death confronted with style. This trip will become The Sun Also Rises. The expatriate community adopts them. Gertrude Stein holds court in her apartment on Rue de Fleuris, surrounded by Picasso paintings. She reads Ernest's stories and declares, "You are part of a lost generation." Ezra Pound edits Ernest's poems with savage red pencil marks. F. Scott Fitzgerald, already famous for This Side of Paradise, befriends the younger, unknown writer. One evening, spring of 1925, a restaurant on the left bank. Fitzgerald is drunk and spiraling into despair. Zelda says, "She laughs at me, says I'm not a man." Scott, "Shut up, come with me." Ernest leads him to the men's room, checks him. Seriously, clinically, he is a doctor's son after all. "See, normal, she's manipulating you." "You're certain?" "Completely. Now finish your drink and go home." 40 years later, Ernest will put this scene in his memoir, A Movable Feast, by which time Fitzgerald is dead and unable to defend himself. Cruelty disguised as honesty, a specialty of the mature Hemingway. But Paris in the 20s is also where the poison begins. 1925. Ernest meets Pauline Pfeiffer at a party. She writes for Vogue magazine, wealthy family, petite, elegant, Catholic, sophisticated. She becomes friends with Hadley. The three of them spend time together. Everything seems fine. Then comes 1926. Their son John, nicknamed Bumby, contracts whooping cough. The doctor orders strict quarantine. Pauline offers to move in to help with the baby during this difficult time. 3 people in a small Paris apartment. Hadley nursing a sick infant, Ernest working on revisions to The Sun Also Rises, Pauline being helpful, charming, present. The affair begins quietly. One evening, after Pauline has been living with them for 3 weeks, Hadley confronts her husband. "Pauline is wonderful with Bumby, isn't she?" "Yes, very helpful." Ernest doesn't meet her eyes. "Have you slept with her?" Silence, long enough to be an answer. "Ernest, I asked you a question." "I love you both." The words land like a physical blow. Hadley goes very still. Then she issues an ultimatum, 100 days without contact with Pauline. If this love is real, it will survive. If it's infatuation, it will fade. Ernest agrees. He breaks the promise on the 3rd day. By December, Hadley knows the marriage is over. She files for divorce with one condition. She gets all royalties from The Sun Also Rises, the novel about their happiness in Pamplona, their summer with bulls and wine, their love before it was poisoned. The book will make Ernest famous. The money will go to his first wife. His second wife will get the author. They divorce in January 1927. Ernest marries Pauline in May, less than 4 months later. The pattern is established. Each wife is a stepping stone. Each love is a betrayal of the previous one. Pauline's family money buys a house in Key West, Florida. Spanish colonial architecture, thick coral walls, high ceilings. She gives birth to 2 more sons, Patrick in 1928, Gregory in 1931. Ernest can now write without worrying about money. He buys a fishing boat, names it the Pillar. He hunts in Wyoming, fishes for marlin, boxes in local gyms, becomes a fixture at Sloppy Joe's bar where everyone knows his name. But wealth corrupts. He drinks more. The marriage that began as passion calcifies into routine. Pauline wants a husband at home. Ernest wants adventure everywhere except home. Then comes tragedy that will haunt him forever. December 1928. Ernest is traveling by train when the telegram arrives. Father shot himself. Diabetes and financial troubles. Come immediately. He reads it, stares out the window at passing winter landscape, pours whiskey from his flask into a glass. Doesn't cry. Years later he will write, "I understood him. The gun, the shame, the inability to meet impossible standards, it all makes terrible sense." Ernest inherits his father's Civil War revolver and his father's demons. The 1930s bring success and restlessness. A Farewell to Arms becomes a bestseller. Ernest is famous now, celebrated, but fame is a trap. Readers want Hemingway the adventurer, not Hemingway the artist. He feels compelled to perform, hunt bigger game, catch bigger fish, prove his masculinity again and again. 1935. Fishing on the Pillar with his sons. A giant shark takes the bait, thrashes beside the boat. Ernest grabs the harpoon, raises it for the killing strike, misses, the harpoon ricochets off the gunwale, fires into both his legs. Jesus Christ. Papa, Patrick, 7 years old, starts crying. "It's fine, son, just hell, Paulin bandages." Later he writes an article for Esquire magazine on being shot again. Self-mockery as defense mechanism, learned long ago in Milan. But the real danger to his marriage arrives in human form. Summer of 1937. The Spanish Civil War has been raging for a year. Fascist forces under General Franco, supported by Hitler and Mussolini, are crushing the Republican government. Ernest goes to Spain as a war correspondent, ostensibly neutral, actually passionately supporting the Republic. In Madrid, he meets Martha Gellhorn. She is 28, beautiful, brilliant, fearless, a novelist and war correspondent for Collier's magazine. Blonde, confident, completely uninterested in being anyone's housewife. She covers the war from the front lines, takes the same risks as the men, often writes better dispatches. This both attracts and infuriates Ernest. He is accustomed to women who support his work. Martha pursues her own. By 1938 they are lovers. Martha doesn't hide in Ernest's shadow. She stands beside him in firefights and bombing raids. They share a hotel in Madrid while shells hit the building. Paulin senses the threat. She goes to Spain, not once but 3 times, trying to win back her husband. She arrives in Madrid during the siege, stays in the same hotel, watches Ernest and Martha together at press briefings and dinners. It is hopeless. You cannot compete with the new obsession of a man fleeing boredom. Paulin holds out for years, refuses to grant a divorce, but exhaustion wins. They separate in 1939, divorce in 1940, 13 years of marriage, his second longest. Martha becomes wife number 3 in November 1940, a simple ceremony in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Neither is particularly excited about marriage. Both prefer war zones to domestic life, but social convention requires the formality. The marriage is doomed from the beginning and both of them know it. Martha Gellhorn does not want to be Mrs. Hemingway. She wants to be Martha Gellhorn, war correspondent. This fundamental incompatibility becomes clear almost immediately. She wants assignments in Europe. He wants her home in Cuba. She wants bylines and front-line dispatches. He wants dinner on the table and admiration for his work. They fight with the precision of 2 writers who know exactly where to stab. 1941. December 7th. Pearl Harbor drags America into the war. Martha immediately pursues assignments covering the European theater. Ernest resents her ambition, her independence, her refusal to prioritize his needs over her career. He drinks, she criticizes his drinking. The fights grow vicious. 1944. Martha secures accreditation with Collier's magazine to cover the Allied invasion of Europe. Ernest, who initially had no interest, uses his fame to steal her position. Colliers can only send one correspondent on the D-Day landing craft. They choose Hemingway. Martha is relegated to covering the aftermath from behind the lines. A hospital ship, not a landing craft. Stories about wounded soldiers, not the battle itself. She never forgives him. Summer of 1944. Paris is liberated. American correspondents celebrate at the Ritz Hotel, which has become unofficial press headquarters. Martha returns from covering the advance through France, exhausted and triumphant. She finds Ernest at the Ritz bar with a young journalist named Mary Welsh. They are not hiding their intimacy. His hand on her knee, her laughter too bright, too familiar. Martha stands in the doorway for a moment, watching. Then she turns and walks out. Their last meeting is March 1945. The divorce finalizes that same year. 4 years of marriage, his shortest. Martha will outlive him by nearly 40 years and spend much of that time making clear to interviewers. She left him, not the other way around. But by the time the divorce papers are signed, Ernest has already proposed to Mary. Mary Welsh is a Time magazine correspondent, 36 years old, from Minnesota. Small, blonde, practical, competent. Ernest proposes on their third meeting. Both are still married to other people. Both file for divorce to be together. They marry in Havana, March 1946. Mary wants children. She becomes pregnant in 1946, then suffers a miscarriage with severe complications. The doctors say no more pregnancies. She wanted to be a mother. Instead, she becomes caretaker to an aging, drinking, increasingly unstable husband. But the marriage starts well enough. Ernest is working on a novel set during the war. Mary manages the household at Finca Vidya, the hilltop house outside Havana that Ernest has owned since 1939. They fish, entertain guests, travel together. Then the 1950s begin, and everything starts falling apart. January of 1954, East Africa. Ernest and Mary are on safari, his second trip to the continent, chasing the same excitement he found 20 years earlier. They hire a bush pilot to fly them sightseeing over Murchison Falls in Uganda. The first crash happens on a Tuesday afternoon. The pilot flies low over the waterfall so Mary can photograph. A flock of ibis rises from the trees. The plane hits them. Birds smash into the propeller and windscreen. The engine coughs, stutters, dies. They are going down. The pilot manages a controlled crash into heavy brush near the riverbank. The plane is destroyed. They crawl out bruised but alive, no serious injuries. They hike to a nearby fishing camp, spend the night with missionaries. The next morning, a rescue plane arrives to fly them to Entebbe for medical evaluation. On takeoff, the engine explodes. Fire engulfs the cabin. The door jams. The pilot kicks it repeatedly, nothing. Ernest lowers his head and uses his skull as a battering ram, cracking the door frame. They escape seconds before the plane is consumed by flames. Ernest's injuries are catastrophic. Fractured skull, ruptured liver, ruptured kidney, ruptured spleen, crushed vertebrae, second-degree burns across his arms and back. Cerebral fluid leaks from his left ear. He should be dead. Instead, 2 days later, he walks out of the jungle carrying a bottle of gin and a bunch of bananas. Journalists mob him, astonished. The international press has already published obituaries. Ernest Hemingway, novelist and war correspondent, perished in African plane crash. He was 54. "Mr. Hemingway, we thought you were dead." He grins, takes a long drink from the bottle. "Read my obituary this morning in the Times. Somebody wrote I defined 20th century literature. Not bad. Should die more often." The story becomes legend. Hemingway the indestructible, Hemingway who laughs at death. But the reality is neurological catastrophe. This is his 9th major concussion. The cumulative brain damage is irreversible. Modern medicine has a name for it: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the same condition that destroys boxers and football players. Repeated head trauma causes protein deposits, neurodegeneration, personality disintegration. Symptoms include paranoia, aggression, depression, memory loss, suicidal ideation. Doctors in 1954 don't understand this yet. So when Ernest begins acting strangely in the years that follow, everyone assumes psychological illness, depression, paranoia. They are half right, but the surveillance he fears is real. To understand what comes next, we must go backward, 15 years backward, to the beginning of Ernest's entanglement with intelligence services on both sides of the Cold War. Late 1941, China. Ernest and Martha travel to Hong Kong, then into the interior, ostensibly covering the Sino-Japanese War for American newspapers. But they are also taking the political temperature of a region balanced on the edge of World War. In a hotel overlooking the Yangtze River, a Soviet diplomat invites them to dinner. His name is Alexander, almost certainly an alias. He speaks perfect English with an accent that might be Georgian. "Mr. Hemingway, you are a man of principles. You fought for the Republic in Spain against the fascists." "I reported from Spain, yes. And now fascism threatens the entire world. The Nazis conquer Europe. America hesitates to act. Where are you going with this?" Alexander smiles. "Nowhere sinister. Simply share your observations when you return home. You are a writer, you see what others miss. No documents, no danger, just conversation between friends. We could give you a code name for discretion. What about Argo from the Greek myth, Jason's ship that sought the Golden Fleece?" Ernest finds this amusing. It feels like a game, like material for a future novel. He agrees casually, attends a few more meetings over the next weeks, shares some observations about American public sentiment, nothing classified, nothing dangerous. But the KGB records it all meticulously. In their files, Ernest Hemingway becomes Agent Argo, asset number unknown, recruited December 1941. The relationship fizzles quickly. Ernest is too famous, too indiscreet, too impatient for real espionage work. The Soviets realize he's useless as an intelligence source. When KGB archives are partially declassified in the 1990s, the assessment will be blunt. Argo provided no intelligence of value. Contact discontinued after limited engagement. But the fact remains in Soviet files, and eventually the FBI will learn about it. 1 year later, Cuba, 1942. The Caribbean has become a war zone. German U-boats prowl the shipping lanes, sinking oil tankers and cargo ships. Havana Harbor is ringed with defenses. The United States Navy is stretched desperately thin. Ernest goes to the American ambassador with a proposal. He will create a private intelligence network. He knows the island, speaks Spanish, has contacts in every port and bar. He will recruit fishermen, bartenders, dock workers, prostitutes. Anyone who sees things, hears things, notices suspicious activity. The ambassador, desperate for any intelligence, agrees. Thus is born the Crook Factory. Ernest names it with characteristic irony, a factory of crooks, criminals, marginal people gathering intelligence from the underworld. He recruits 24 informants across Havana and the surrounding towns. They report on Spanish phalangists who sympathize with Franco, on German nationals living in Cuba who might be transmitting ship movements, on suspicious vessels in remote anchorages. The FBI, which operates its own network in Cuba, is furious. Edgar Hoover considers Hemingway an amateur and a security risk, but military intelligence overrules him. The Crook Factory is producing actionable intelligence. Ernest receives payment of $1,000 per month, substantial money in 1942. More importantly, he receives unlimited gasoline, which is strictly rationed everywhere else. His boat, the Pillar, is outfitted with radios, grenades, and a mounted machine gun. The plan is audacious. Patrol Cuban waters disguised as a fishing vessel. If they encounter a German submarine, they will wait until it surfaces to inspect them, standard procedure for U-boats checking neutral craft. Then they will attack at point-blank range. Throw grenades down the conning tower hatch. Rake the deck with machine gun fire. Either capture the submarine or die trying. It never happens. They patrol for 18 months, see nothing. But Ernest loves every minute of it. The mission, the danger, the sense of being useful in the war effort. For a writer who always felt literature was insufficient, this is validation. He is not just describing war, he is fighting it. But there are consequences he doesn't foresee. The FBI adds the crook factory to his file. Hoover doesn't trust Ernest's motives. Why is a left-wing writer who fought alongside communists in Spain now so eager to work for American intelligence? Is he loyal to America, or is he building his own power base? Or worse, is he feeding information to the Soviets? The suspicion takes root. After the war ends and the crook factory dissolves, the FBI file remains open. New entries accumulate throughout the 1940s and 50s. By 1960, Ernest Hemingway is trapped between two intelligence services, one that once recruited him and considers him a failed asset, another that surveils him as a potential traitor. He is a double agent who never meant to be an agent at all. The 1950s bring one more complication. 1952, Ernest publishes The Old Man and the Sea, a short novel about an aging Cuban fisherman's struggle with a giant marlin. It is his first critical success in years, restoring his reputation after a string of disappointing books. He wins the Pulitzer Prize. Then, in 1954, the Nobel Prize for Literature. He is at the peak of fame, but Cuba is changing. Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship is crumbling. Revolutionaries operate in the mountains and cities. Among them is a young lawyer named Fidel Castro, leading guerrilla fighters in the Sierra Maestra. Ernest has lived in Cuba for nearly 2 decades. He loves the island, the people, the fishing. He supports the revolutionaries, not because he is a communist, but because he despises dictators. In Spain, he fought Franco. In Cuba, he opposes Batista. For him, it is moral clarity, the same fight. He provides money to the movement, offers his house as a meeting place, introduces foreign journalists to rebel contacts. He doesn't hide his sympathies. Batista's secret police take note. So does the FBI in Washington. January of 1959, Castro's forces take Havana. Batista flees to the Dominican Republic. The revolution succeeds. Ernest watches from Finca Villa, cautiously hopeful that Cuba will finally be free. May of 1960, Castro attends a fishing tournament in Havana. He and Ernest meet briefly, their only face-to-face encounter. They talk only about fishing, marlins, the sea. Castro later claims he carried a copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls in his rucksack during the guerrilla campaign. This is probably propaganda, but Ernest wants to believe it. Castro makes a public announcement. Hemingway is a friend of Cuba. This American will always be welcome here. But Ernest cannot accept the privilege. The revolution is turning radical. American properties are seized. United States citizens are expelled. Diplomatic relations between the two countries deteriorate rapidly. Ernest is caught between two nations. Cuba, which once welcomed him, is now hostile to Americans. America, in the grip of Cold War paranoia, suspects anyone with Cuban ties. Summer of 1960. Ernest and Mary leave Cuba quietly, taking almost nothing. They tell friends they will return soon for Ernest's papers and manuscripts. They never do. Finca Villa remains exactly as they left it. Books on the shelves, clothes in the closets, the typewriter on the desk, 9,000 volumes in the library. It will eventually become a museum, preserved as a time capsule of July 1960. Ernest Hemingway walks away from the only place he ever truly called home. But there is one more story from the 1950s that cannot be omitted. One more betrayal, one more love, one more woman who enters and then haunts him. 1950. Ernest returns to Italy, visiting the sites of his wounding 32 years earlier. Venice, the countryside around Fasalta. He is 51 years old now, thick around the middle, gray in his beard, but still seeking the Italy of his youth. At a duck-hunting party, he meets Adriana Ivancic. She is 18 years old, an Italian countess from an old family that has fallen on hard times. Dark hair, aristocratic features, innocent yet sophisticated. Ernest becomes obsessed. It is not, by all accounts, a physical affair. Adriana will maintain until her death in 2006 that nothing sexual occurred, and the evidence supports this. But it is an affair of the heart and mind, perhaps more dangerous than a simple seduction. For 7 years they exchange letters. He writes her hundreds, passionate, longing, paternal, romantic, confused. She responds politely but maintains distance. She visits Cuba twice. Ernest stares at her with an intensity that makes everyone uncomfortable. He writes across the river and into the trees with Adriana as the model for the young Italian countess who loves the dying American colonel. The novel is savaged by critics. They call it sentimental, embarrassing, self-pitying. Ernest is wounded more deeply than he admits publicly. But the obsession continues. Mary knows, how could she not? The letters arrive weekly. Adriana's photograph sits on his desk. He talks about her constantly. Mary tolerates it because what choice does she have? Leave him after investing years in this marriage. Divorce him and face the world's judgment. So she stays, watches, endures. One morning in the early 1950s, the exact date is lost. Mary finds an old photograph of her first husband while sorting papers. She leaves it on the dresser, meaning nothing by it. Ernest finds it. He is drunk or manic or perhaps both. He picks up his revolver. "Ernest, what are you doing?" 6 shots. The toilet explodes in a shower of porcelain fragments and water. There's your goddamn ex-husband. That was 20 years ago. He means nothing. Not anymore. He reloads, fires again into the wreckage. Mary calls the plumber, twice. The story circulates among their Havana friends, more evidence that Papa Hemingway is becoming unhinged. But Mary stays. She will stay through everything that comes next. Even the final morning. But before we reach that final morning in Ketchum, there is another tragedy running parallel, one Ernest caused but could not prevent, because he was both the disease and the symptom. His youngest son carried a secret that burned like acid. Gregory Hancock Hemingway was born in Kansas City, November 12, 1931. Pauline's labor was difficult. Ernest was away hunting in Wyoming. He arrived 4 days late, looked at the baby briefly, then went back to work. The pattern was established from birth: father absent, son longing. Ernest nicknamed him Jiggy. Later, when the boy became a doctor, Papa would say with pride, "2 doctors in the family now, my father and my son." But there was something else he said privately, whispered to friends after too much whiskey. "He's got the biggest dark side in the family, except me." Ernest recognized in his youngest child a mirror of his own demons, but recognition is not compassion. Instead of helping, he demanded, "Be a man, hunt, fish, fight, prove yourself worthy of the name Hemingway." Gregory tried desperately. He went on safari with his father, learned to shoot, but something was profoundly wrong, a dissonance between who he was and who he was supposed to be. In childhood, when no one was watching, Gregory would slip into his stepmother's closet, touch the dresses, try on the shoes, hold the fabric against his body. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't a game. It was need, wordless, terrifying, undeniable. Mid-1940s, Gregory is 14 or 15. Martha Gellhorn, the third wife, is temporarily in the house before the divorce. Her belongings are in the wardrobe. Gregory waits until the house is quiet, goes into the bedroom, closes the door, takes out one of Martha's dresses, pulls it over his head. The fabric feels right in a way nothing else ever has. The door opens. Ernest stands there. For a single frozen moment, father and son stare at each other in mutual horror. "What the hell are you doing?" "Papa, I was just..." "Take that off right now." "I didn't mean to." "You're my son. You're a man. Do you understand me?" Gregory tears off the dress with shaking hands, face burning with shame so intense it feels like physical pain. Ernest's rage is volcanic, not just anger but terror. For a man who built his entire identity on hypermasculinity, whose own mother dressed him as a girl, whose father shot himself, this is unbearable. It is evidence of failure. Proof that something is fundamentally wrong with the Hemingway blood. Years later, Gregory will explain it to an interviewer. "You've got a father who's super masculine but who protests against it all the time. He's deadly worried about it, and that worry gets transmitted." Ernest sends his son to psychiatrists, multiple doctors in multiple cities over several years. The diagnosis varies: sexual deviance, identity confusion, mental illness. The recommended treatment is always the same: make him normal. They try electroshock therapy, the same procedure that will later be used on Ernest himself. For Gregory, the goal is to erase the desire to wear women's clothing. Current applied to the brain, induced seizures, memory disruption. It doesn't work. The desire remains. The shame deepens and metastasizes. "I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying not to be a transvestite," Gregory will say decades later. His voice on the recording is exhausted, bitter, resigned. The therapy fails. The shame becomes alcoholism, drug use, bipolar disorder manifesting in his 20s. The genetic curse of the Hemingway family activates like a sleeper virus. Ernest's father Clarence shot himself in 1928. Ernest will shoot himself in 1961. His brother Lester will shoot himself in 1982. His sister Ursula will overdose in 1966. His granddaughter Margot will overdose in 1996. And Gregory will die as Gloria in a Miami jail cell in 2001. But that transformation comes much later. In the 1950s, Gregory is still fighting to be the son his father demands. He goes to medical school, becomes a doctor as if a degree can cure what's wrong. He marries, has children, drinks heavily. Ernest, spiraling into his own madness, watches his son struggle and sees only weakness. At family gatherings, the tension is suffocating. Gregory drinks more. Ernest criticizes more. They argue about politics, medicine, life choices, everything and nothing. November of 1954. Pauline dies suddenly during routine surgery, a hemorrhage. She is 58 years old. Gregory, 23, blames his father. If Ernest hadn't left her, hadn't broken her heart, maybe she would still be alive. Ernest blames Gregory. They had argued on the phone shortly before Pauline's surgery, a vicious fight about Gregory's drinking, his instability, his cross-dressing. Ernest tells friends that his son's behavior killed Pauline with stress and shame. The accusation is monstrously unfair, but Ernest believes it, or needs to believe it, because blame is easier than grief. Gregory carries the guilt for years, tries to drown it in alcohol, tries to therapy it away, but guilt doesn't dissolve. It calcifies into permanent scar tissue. Summer of 1961. Ernest is in Mayo Clinic receiving his second round of electroshock treatments. Gregory, now 30, is practicing medicine in Montana. He hears about his father's condition from Mary. He wants to help but doesn't know how. The distance between them, geographic and emotional, is too vast to cross. July 2, 1961. A phone call: his father is dead, suicide, shotgun. Gregory will spend the next 4 decades trying to understand, trying to forgive, trying to become who he always was beneath the imposed identity. 1995. Gregory, 64 years old, undergoes sex reassignment surgery. Becomes Gloria. It is not an impulse. It is not a breakdown. It is the culmination of a lifetime spent fighting against himself. The legal battles are Byzantine. Gloria marries Ida twice, once as Gregory before the surgery, once as Gloria after. Writes 2 wills. After death, the children contest the second will, arguing that Florida doesn't recognize same-sex marriage and Gloria is legally female, so the second marriage is invalid. October of 2001. Gloria Hemingway, drunk and distressed, walks half-naked through the streets of Key Biscayne, Florida. Police arrest her for indecent exposure and disorderly conduct. She is placed in the women's section of Miami-Dade County Jail. Hours later, guards find her unresponsive on the cell floor. Cardiac arrest, exacerbated by high blood pressure, alcohol withdrawal, and years of medication. She dies there alone. Alcoholism, bipolar disorder, chronic shame, gender dysphoria untreated for 6 decades. All the demons Ernest fought passed to his child like a genetic curse. But Gloria had one thing Ernest never did: the courage to be herself, even if it cost everything. While Gregory struggled in private, Ernest's public battle was intensifying. The enemy was invisible but relentlessly present. The FBI file on Ernest Hemingway, Bureau File number 64-23312, began in 1933. The early entries are mundane. Ernest joins various writers' organizations, attends anti-fascist rallies, publicly supports the Spanish Republic against Franco. In the political climate of the 1930s, this is sufficient to warrant attention. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI director since 1924, sees communist infiltration everywhere. Artists and intellectuals who oppose fascism are automatically suspect. The file grows steadily. Agents attend Ernest's public speeches, record his associations, note which organizations invite him to speak. When he forms the Crook Factory in Cuba, surveillance intensifies. Hoover personally disapproves of the amateur intelligence operation, considers Hemingway unreliable and potentially compromised. After the war ends, during the Red Scare and McCarthyism, the file becomes damning. Ernest's brief contact with Soviet intelligence, however useless, however innocent, is discovered and recorded. The meetings in China with Alexander, the code name Argo. It doesn't matter that he provided nothing valuable. The contact alone is sufficient evidence of disloyalty. Add his friendships with suspected communists, his vocal support for Castro's revolution, his public criticism of American foreign policy, his continuing residence in Cuba after the revolution. By 1960, in J. Edgar Hoover's assessment, Ernest Hemingway is a security risk who requires active monitoring. The surveillance is comprehensive. Telephone taps on his line in Ketchum. Mail interception, letters opened, photographed, resealed. Physical surveillance, agents following him to banks, stores, medical appointments. Informants in his social circle reporting on his statements and mood. This is not paranoia. This is documented FBI procedure for suspected subversives. But Ernest doesn't know this with certainty. He suspects. He feels it. The knowledge sits in his gut like a tumor. Ketchum, Idaho, fall of 1960. Ernest goes to Idaho First National Bank to conduct routine business. He stands at the counter, deposit slip in hand. His hands won't stop trembling. They're recording my account number. They'll send it to Washington. Ernest, it's just standard banking procedure, Mary says quietly beside him. No, you don't understand. They're tracking everything, every transaction. At the grocery store, he notices a man in a gray suit near the produce section. The man has been there for 15 minutes, hasn't put anything in his basket, keeps glancing toward Ernest. That man over there, he's following us. Sweetheart, he's just another customer. You think I'm crazy. I think you're exhausted, you need rest. But he isn't crazy. FBI documents declassified in 1983 will confirm it. Agents were assigned to monitor Hemingway during this exact period. They filed reports on his movements, his financial transactions, his increasingly agitated state of mind. One report from November 1960 notes, subject appears highly suspicious and agitated, believes he is under surveillance. Behavior suggests possible mental instability. The irony is grotesque. The FBI is surveilling him. He notices and says so. They document his awareness as evidence of paranoia. It's a closed loop, a trap with no escape. His friend A.E. Hotchner visits in November. They take a walk in the cold mountain air. Ernest keeps looking over his shoulder. The house is wired, phones tapped. They open the mail before it gets to us. Papa, you need to rest. You're working too hard. You don't believe me either. Nobody believes me. Hotchner doesn't believe. Nobody does. Mary schedules an appointment with Dr. George Saviers, their friend and Ernest's physician in Ketchum. Saviers recommends psychiatric evaluation at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Ernest resists. If I go there, I won't come back the same. He's right. St. Mary's Hospital, Rochester, Minnesota, late November of 1960. Ketchum, Idaho, Saturday night, July 1, 1961. Electroshock is considered a breakthrough treatment for depression in 1960. The mechanism is poorly understood, but results are sometimes dramatic. Patients emerge calmer, more stable. The side effect is memory loss. For most patients, this is acceptable. For a writer whose art depends on precise recall, it is murder. Ernest tries to refuse. The doctors explain patiently that without treatment, his depression will kill him. He has already attempted suicide. Mary found him with a gun. The choice, they say, is temporary memory disruption or death. It's a false choice. The memory loss destroys the person he is. He undergoes 15 sessions over December and early January. Each session follows the same protocol. Electrodes attached to both temples, anesthesia administered, electric current applied, seizure induced. Afterwards, confusion, severe headache, blank spaces where memories should exist. By mid-January, he cannot remember the names of friends, cannot recall details of stories he planned to write, cannot access the internal library that made his prose so exact. He tells the doctors, "Without my memory I cannot write. You've cured the depression, but you've destroyed the writer. What good is that?" They note his complaint in the medical record, then discharge him as improved. January of 1961. Ernest returns to Ketchum, sits at his typewriter, stares at blank paper for hours, produces nothing. The engine is broken. Mary is relieved he's home. She believes the worst is over. The doctors said he was better. But Ernest knows the truth. He has been annihilated and left breathing. April, he stands at the gun cabinet for a long time, studying the rifles. Mary finds him there, calls Dr. Saviers in panic. They fly Ernest back to Mayo immediately. Another round of electroshock. 15 to 20 more sessions over late April and May. The doctors are pleased with his compliance. He is calmer, less argumentative. They interpret this as therapeutic success. It is actually surrender. Late June, they discharge him again. Stable, they declare, ready to resume normal life. On the flight back to Idaho, Ernest is silent. On the drive from the airport, he tries to open the car door while the vehicle is moving at highway speed. Mary grabs him. At one point outside the terminal, he walks deliberately toward a spinning airplane propeller. George Saviers pulls him back just in time. They arrive in Ketchum on Sunday, July 1st. Mary makes dinner. Ernest eats little. After dinner, he goes to his room early. Mary hears him moving around but gives him privacy. He needs space, she thinks. She doesn't understand. Alone is the most dangerous place for him now. Around 2 in the morning, he finally sleeps, fitfully, with bad dreams he won't remember. Dawn comes early to Idaho in summer. Sunday morning, July 2nd, 1961. Ernest wakes before Mary, goes downstairs quietly. The house is silent. Morning light slants through the windows. He opens the gun cabinet in the foyer. The keys are in his pocket. He took them weeks ago, anticipating this moment. He selects the Boss & Co. double-barrel 12-gauge, beautiful, engraved. A gift years ago. He has killed elk with this gun, pheasants, geese. Now one final use remains. He loads both barrels. The shells click into place with a sound he has heard 10,000 times. Upstairs, Mary sleeps. Perhaps he thinks about Paris in the 20s, about Hadley and happiness before it curdled. Perhaps he thinks about Spain and the Republic's doomed cause. Perhaps he thinks about Africa, reading his own obituary with a bottle of gin. Perhaps he thinks about nothing at all, the memories already erased by electricity and time. He places both barrels in his mouth, reaches for the triggers. 7:30 in the morning, 2 shots nearly simultaneous. Mary wakes, runs downstairs, finds him in the foyer. Ernest Miller Hemingway is dead at 61 years old. Mary calls the police first, then Dr. George Saviers, then she calls Ernest's 3 sons. The official statement is carefully worded. Ernest Hemingway died this morning of an accidental, self-inflicted gunshot wound while cleaning his firearm. Mary insists on the word accidental. He was cleaning the gun, she tells the police. It discharged. A terrible accident. No one believes her. You don't clean a loaded gun. You don't clean both barrels simultaneously. You don't put a gun barrel in your mouth to clean it. But Mary needs the lie. Suicide creates complications, insurance, religious burial, social stigma. More importantly, admitting suicide means admitting she failed to save him. The lie is protective scaffolding around unbearable truth. She maintains it for 3 months. Then quietly, in September of 1961, she admits to close friends. It was suicide. By December, she stops contradicting journalists who write the truth, but she never speaks about it publicly in detail. The funeral is held in Ketchum on July 5th. A Catholic service, though Ernest was never religious, perhaps Pauline's lingering influence or Mary's need for ritual structure. The casket is closed. Some of his oldest friends attend. A. E. Hotchner, who witnessed the descent into paranoia. Toby Bruce, who drove Ernest across America more times than either could count. Gary Cooper sends condolences but is too ill with cancer to travel. He will die himself 4 months later. Ernest's 3 sons stand together near the front. Jack, called Bumby, age 37, the oldest from Hadley, the only one who will survive relatively intact. Patrick, 32, from Pauline, already battling depression, already hospitalized twice, facing a lifetime of mental illness. Gregory, 29, from Pauline, still Gregory then, not yet Gloria, carrying secrets that will take another 40 years to resolve. They bury him in Ketchum Cemetery on a hillside with a view of the mountains. The gravestone is plain granite. Ernest Miller Hemingway, July 21, 1899, July 2, 1961. No mention of the 4 wives. No mention of the wars, the books, the Nobel Prize. No mention of the FBI file or the electroshock or the paranoia that was justified. Just the dates, birth and death, Everything between is silence. In the days and weeks after, theories multiply like bacteria. The simplest explanation satisfies most people: depression. He suffered from clinical depression, likely bipolar disorder, worsened by decades of alcoholism. The electroshock therapy destroyed his memory and his ability to write. Without writing, life had no meaning. He chose death over a slow fade into irrelevance. This is clean, clinical, understandable, tragic but comprehensible. Some suggest terminal illness. Ernest had multiple health problems in his final years: diabetes, high blood pressure, liver damage from alcohol, kidney problems from the plane crashes. Perhaps doctors found something they didn't tell Mary. Perhaps he chose quick death over prolonged suffering. No autopsy supports this theory, but it persists because it offers dignity. Death with agency rather than death from despair. Then there are the darker theories that won't emerge fully until decades later. 22 years pass. 1983. The Freedom of Information Act forces government agencies to declassify old files. Researchers request Ernest Hemingway's FBI file. What arrives is stunning. 124 pages, portions redacted, but enough visible to confirm everything Ernest claimed in his final year. J. Edgar Hoover personally authorized surveillance. Agents monitored telephone calls, intercepted and photographed mail, followed him to banks and stores, placed informants in his social circle to report on conversations. The stated justification: suspected communist sympathies based on his support for the Spanish Republic, his residence in Cuba, his friendships with leftists, and, most damning, his brief recruitment by Soviet intelligence in 1941. The file reveals Kafkaesque absurdity. Ernest tells everyone he's being watched. Everyone thinks he's paranoid. The FBI notes that he suspects surveillance, which they interpret as evidence of mental instability, which they report in documents describing their surveillance of him. He was right, they were watching, but because he seemed crazy when he said it, nobody believed him, and disbelief made him crazier. If even one person in 1960, Mary, Dr. Saviers, the Mayo Clinic psychiatrists, had taken his claims seriously, had contacted the FBI directly and asked, "Are you surveilling this man?" the answer would have been yes. Ernest would have been vindicated. His awareness would have been reframed as justified vigilance rather than paranoid delusion. Instead, they administered electroshock therapy to cure a paranoia that was actually accurate perception. The revelation in 1983 sparks outrage among civil liberties advocates. Why was a novelist surveilled for political opinions? Why was J. Edgar Hoover allowed to treat dissent as treason? Why did the FBI maintain extensive files on artists whose only crime was disagreeing with government policy? The questions come decades too late to help Ernest, but they vindicate him posthumously. His truth, dismissed as madness in life, becomes accepted history after death. There is no satisfaction in being proven right when you're dead, but perhaps there is a kind of justice. Some conspiracy theorists go further, suggesting the FBI didn't just surveil Ernest but actively drove him to suicide or even staged his death. This theory is almost certainly false. The evidence for suicide is overwhelming: documented depression, previous attempts, explicit statements that life without writing was unbearable. But the theory persists because there is terrible poetry in it. The man who survived wars and plane crashes and big game hunts was ultimately destroyed not by dramatic violence, but by bureaucratic harassment and medical malpractice. The truth is probably both simpler and more tragic. Ernest Hemingway's brain was physically damaged by repeated head trauma, 9 major concussions over 4 decades. Modern medicine recognizes this as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the same degenerative disease that destroys boxers and football players. The symptoms match exactly: mood swings, paranoia, aggression, depression, cognitive decline, suicidal ideation. Add genetic predisposition, his father's suicide, his siblings' mental illness. Add alcoholism running through the family. Add electroshock therapy that erased his memory. Add FBI surveillance that confirmed his worst fears while making everyone think he was delusional. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together, they were lethal. On the morning of July 2nd, 1961, Ernest Hemingway's damaged brain decided it had endured enough. But the Hemingway curse doesn't end with Ernest. The family tree reads like a chronicle of self-destruction. Clarence shot himself in 1928, Ernest in 1961, Lester in 1982, Ursula overdosed in 1966, though whether suicide or accident remains unclear. Of Ernest's 3 sons, Jack survives into his 90s, becomes a conservationist, escapes relatively intact. Patrick battles severe depression his entire life, is hospitalized multiple times but survives. Gregory becomes Gloria and dies in a jail cell in 2001. Ernest's granddaughter Margot Hemingway, Jack's daughter named after the wine, becomes a successful model and actress in the 1970s and 80s. Beautiful, famous, seemingly blessed. On July 1, 1996, one day before the 35th anniversary of Ernest's death, she dies of a barbiturate overdose in her Santa Monica apartment. The coroner rules it suicide. The pattern is undeniable: depression, alcoholism, suicide recurring across 3 generations. Modern genetics would identify this as hereditary mental illness with high penetrance, likely bipolar disorder. But genetics doesn't explain everything. There is also the crushing weight of the name. To be a Hemingway is to carry impossible expectations: literary genius, physical courage, masculine dominance. Ernest created an archetype and imprisoned his descendants inside it. Gloria Hemingway understood this better than anyone. In an interview late in life, she said, "My father was so terrified of being seen as weak that he made strength into a prison, and then he locked all of us in there with him." Mary Welsh Hemingway survives her husband by 25 years. She never remarries. She spends the decade after his death editing and publishing posthumous work. A Movable Feast, his Paris memoir which she shapes according to her judgment. Islands in the Stream, a novel he never finished. The Dangerous Summer, about bullfighting, various short stories and fragments. Critics debate whether Ernest would have wanted these published. He was a perfectionist who destroyed drafts he considered unworthy. Mary decides the world deserves everything. Whether this is tribute or betrayal depends on whom you ask. In 1976, she publishes her own memoir, How It Was. It's a defense of their marriage, an explanation of his final years, an insistence that she did everything possible to save him. Perhaps she did. Perhaps no one could have saved him. Mary Welsh Hemingway dies in November of 1986 in New York of heart failure. She is 78. They bury her next to Ernest in Ketchum Cemetery, together in death as they were in those final, terrible years. The houses remain. Key West, Florida. The home on Whitehead Street where Ernest and Pauline lived in the 1930s is now a museum. Tourists walk through rooms where he wrote A Farewell to Arms and To Have and Have Not. They see the studio where he worked, the pool that Pauline built while he was in Spain, the most expensive pool in Florida at the time. Throughout the house and garden live approximately 50 cats, all descendants of Snow White, Ernest's original 6-toed cat. The polydactyl gene is dominant. Most have 6 or 7 toes on their front paws. They lounge on Ernest's bed, sit on his writing desk, patrol the grounds. The cats are protected by local ordinance. They are living monuments to a dead writer, which is either deeply poignant or mildly absurd depending on your sensibility. In the garden beside the pool stands another monument, the urinal from Sloppy Joe's bar. When the bar moved locations in the 1930s, Ernest allegedly stole it. "I pissed away so much money in that bar," he supposedly said. "I own the damn urinal." Whether this actually happened or is embellished legend is unclear, but the urinal remains, testament to his humor and his need to mark territory even in small ways. Havana, Cuba. Finca Villa, the hilltop house where Ernest lived from 1939 to 1960, is preserved exactly as he left it. Books on the shelves, mounted animal heads on the walls, the typewriter on the desk, 9,000 volumes in the library. For decades, the American embargo prevented researchers from visiting. In 2007, a joint preservation project began restoring the house and cataloging its contents. They found manuscripts, letters, photographs, pieces of Ernest's life frozen in July 1960, waiting to be discovered. Standing in that house, you can almost see him, at the typewriter in the morning, bare-chested in tropical heat, on the terrace at sunset with a drink, at the boat dock preparing the pillar for another fishing expedition. But ghosts aren't real. The house is empty. Only objects remain. In the end, Ernest Hemingway was recruited 3 times. First by the Soviets in China, 1941. Agent Argo, useless, discontinued, but recorded forever in files that would later destroy his reputation. Second by the Americans in Cuba, 1942. The Crook Factory, amateur but effective, leaving him under permanent FBI suspicion. But the real recruitment happened much earlier. His mother recruited him into an experiment with identity, dressing him as a girl until age 5. His father recruited him into the cult of masculinity, teaching him to hunt and never show weakness. War recruited him into adrenaline addiction, teaching him that danger equals authenticity. Fame recruited him into the prison of his own image, forcing him to perform Ernest Hemingway, until performance became indistinguishable from person. 4 wives, each loved and betrayed. 3 sons, each damaged by proximity to genius. 9 concussions, each erasing more of who he was. 124 pages in an FBI file, confirming his sanity while everyone called him mad. 2 triggers pulled simultaneously on a July morning in Idaho. The urinal still stands beside the pool in Key West. The 6 stowed cats still prowl the property. Finca Villa still waits in Havana, books gathering dust, the typewriter silent. Ernest's grave in Ketchum receives visitors year-round. They leave bottles of whiskey, fishing flies, handwritten notes. "Thank you for the words," they write. "Thank you for showing us how to see." He won the Nobel Prize. He changed American literature forever. He created a prose style so distinctive that Hemingway'S remains a recognized term. And he died alone at dawn, because doctors erased the only thing that gave his life meaning. The FBI declassified his file 22 years too late. He was right about the surveillance, but truth without vindication is just another form of torture. July 2, 1961. Ernest Hemingway made his final editorial decision. Cut the excess. Use short sentences. Make every word count. The iceberg principle applied to his own ending. 2 shots, 1 conclusion, no revision possible. He was 61 years old. He had survived wars, plane crashes, safaris, revolutions, and 9 concussions. But he could not survive the erasure of memory, the loss of the only weapon he ever trusted, words on paper. He chose the Boss & Co. 12-gauge, beautiful, engraved, his favorite. If there had to be an ending, at least it was written with style.